this over to Dr. John Fisk, the director of the Wallace Center, to give you an introduction.
Thank you, Jeff. It's good to be back with all of you today. Good afternoon. The Wallace Center is a program group of the Winrock International and is the host of the NGFN webinar series. The Center has been a leading organization in this movement for over 30 years now. Today we support entrepreneurs and communities as they build a new 21st century food system that's healthier for the people, the environment, and the economy. In particular, we're focused on advancing regional and collaborative efforts around the country to move good food, healthy, green, fair, and affordable food beyond direct marketing realms into larger scale wholesale channels. The National Good Food Network is a key initiative of the Wallace Center, and we've been at this for about 6 years now, and it continues to grow, and it really illustrates our market-based strategy, so with the goal of moving more good food to more people. So with that, Jeff's going to tell you a little bit more about the NGFN.
Sure. The NGFN, or National Good Food Network, is an initiative of the Wallace Center. It is structured as a network of networks which ensures efficient flow of information and innovation from boots-on-the-ground projects to the national level and back down to the grassroots level across the nation. The Wallace Center coordinates and supports the network. Our goals are to work with the growers to ensure that there's an abundant supply of good food to meet the high consumer demand for the product, to collect and disseminate the best models, stories, and methods and outcomes, such as presenting it on this webinar, and to ensure that policymakers are informed about the wonderful successes our network and partners have had so that we can continue to increase support for regional healthy food. One major piece of the NGFN is the NGFN's Food Hub collaboration. For the last couple of years, we have worked to support the growth and success of food hubs across the country with a four-pillar approach: networking, research, technical assistance, intensive work with 9 study hubs, and some regional food networks. We have a library of fantastic resources on food hubs. You can get them there directly by typing foodhub.info into your browser. This is a collaboration with USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, Center for Regional Food Systems, at Michigan State University, Farm Credit Council, and recent collaboration partners Wholesome Wave, School Food Focus, and the National Farm to School Network, all bringing unique perspectives to supporting this linchpin piece of regional food systems. So John, why don't you introduce our first panelist?
I'd be glad to do that. You know, this is a very interesting webinar, I think, because we see a lot of food hubs, as Jeff just described, starting up, but at the same time there's this ongoing recognition that, you know, there's organizations that we call food banks or the like that have infrastructure, right? They have staff, they have knowledge, they have trucks, and they have, you know, strong interest, and are beginning to see their role more broadly. So I find this particular webinar really fascinating, and it's great to have some of the pioneers with us today from New York and from California. We have Blake Young, David Shubezi, and Mitch Gruber. But in addition to these three, I know there's some other food banks out there on the landscape that are looking at this as well, and I just want to call them out: the Southern Alabama Food Bank, the Northeast Georgia Food Bank, and Philabundance in Philadelphia. And links to each of those can be found on our webinar archive page that I think Jeff mentioned earlier. So with that, without any further delay, let me introduce you to Blake Young. Blake is the president and CEO of the Sacramento Food Bank and Family Services, which is privately a funded nonprofit organization that serves over 25,000 men, women, and children each month. The organization's primary mission is to serve low-income families through 6 programs: food, clothing, youth education, adult education, parent education, and senior nutrition and visitation services. So a pretty comprehensive program there they got. Sacramento Food Bank has over 5,000 volunteers and a staff of 40. Prior to leading the organization, Blake spent 9 years as the Public Relations and Operations Director for the same organization. In addition, Blake serves as the board chairman for Soil-Borne Farms and is on the Community Action Board with Sacramento Training and Employment Agency. Blake graduated from Chico State University and has served in the U.S. Army. So Blake, let me turn it over to you to take us through what you've got for us today.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here. All right. Well, let me go back. A little history about our organization. Again, the organization's name is Sacramento Food Bank and Family Services. We were founded in 1976. Our mission statement is we are dedicated to assisting those in need by alleviating their immediate pain and problems and by moving folks towards self-sufficiency and financial independence. I'll get to that piece in just a minute. We are, like you said, a privately funded organization. 90% of our revenue comes from individuals and corporate sponsorship. 8% is grant funding, and we have 2% as other government sources. We've had steady growth over time. Like you said, we have 6 diverse programs. First, we focus on basic needs, and that's where we started, such as food and clothing and baby supplies. Then we move into more comprehensive services with education programming. We focus on pre-kindergarten all the way up to seniors. Our education program includes workforce development and technology training, gardening, cooking and nutrition classes, general education for high school dropouts, and English as a second language for adults. Our education for kids ages pre-kindergarten to high school include enrichment activities for the little ones, homework assistance for elementary age kids, and technology and college readiness for middle age and high school kids. Close to 1,000 people access our services per day, and our core values are community, compassion, and integrity. A little bit about the organization. Slide 2, our strategic plan. So in 2008, we conducted a year-long needs assessment. That was to be the basis for a strategic plan. The purpose was to evaluate what social services were currently available, what were the critical needs of our community, and how our programs compared. The assessment found that we were really good at basic services like food, clothing, more comprehensive services like education. However, we did run 2 programs. One was a transitional living program, and another was an art therapy program that we decided to close due to other organizations in town. Again, this needs assessment showed that other organizations in town ran programs more comprehensively, and they also had the capacity to grow. So the needs assessment, which turned into the strategic plan, this really showed us that, you know, we were really good at some things, other things we weren't so great at, and we made the decision to close those 2 programs and really focus on what we thought we were good at. That freed up quite a bit of resources, particularly funds that were going to the transitional living program. It was a very expensive program, and also it opened up a whole square block across from our campus that we owned to allow us to do some additional development. In this strategic plan, we'll focus on a new direction, so I'll talk a little bit about traditional food banking versus non-traditional approach. And then our future plan will focus on expanding our food program, and this is where we talk specifically about our food services. We feel that as a food bank, most food banks don't focus on other programming, but our food bank, the food program, is really the gateway to our other services. If you remember back on the mission statement, we take care of folks with basic needs, but then we really focus on self-sufficiency and financial independence. But what we found, 25 out of 26,000, 25 out of maybe 27,000 people we serve per month are served through our food program. So our food program, so we kind of feel unique. So we started this almost 7 years ago, where we thought what we would call a very traditional approach to food banking was to have fixed facilities where folks would come to each facility and pick up bags of food, and again, what I would call a very institutional setting. So as part of the strategic plan, we closed all of our fixed facilities. Our main food that we would get sourced came from grocery stores, and we began to make relationships with farms and local farmers. And in fact, 60% of the produce that we distribute now comes from within a 60-mile radius. We provide 12 distributions per month in an open-air farmers market with music and other activities. We distribute in the daytime and evenings, so folks with marginal employment that cannot access during work hours have an opportunity at this fresh food. We distribute at and partner with churches, community centers, and public schools, and these have become welcoming places for folks in what we would call food deserts and challenged neighborhoods. This mobile approach, where people are in kind of open-air markets, creates a sense of community. Very important to us. It certainly creates a dignified environment with the ability for us and our volunteers. You had mentioned 5,000 volunteers. We actually are north of 5,000 now. It gives us the ability to really engage clients and talk about health and nutrition as opposed to serving them institutionally through a window. Again, I don't want to paint a negative picture about how some food programs operate, but we just decided that this open style, allowing our volunteers and staff to engage with folks, it's much more dignified, and it's helped us really introduce this whole idea that food banks are definitely part of an important food system, and that part of that food system is providing food access to folks that are insecure. By going mobile, we really took care of a lot of folks' transportation challenges. In our organization, our food program, specifically 11% of the folks that access our food are seniors above the age of 65, and almost 50% of the people that we serve are children under the age of 18. You know, what we found is it really creates a sense of community. We're improving food access. We are finding that folks, once introduced to these products, and we'll get a little bit to the nutrition education, really enjoy it. Obviously, there's a challenge with how to utilize it, and we'll get to that. We track all of our clients with a robust database with laptops at every location, which allows us a good source of data and prevents duplication of services. Our food program we view as a safety net service, so folks can only come to our services once per month. This format creates a positive experience that is very non-institutional and really allows us to build relationships. It also gives our volunteers a chance at kind of a unique activity, because in our old, more traditional way, our volunteers were not able to engage folks. Literally, they handed grocery bags out of a window, and there wasn't just an opportunity to build those relationships, which we find are key to helping people, what I would call kind of change habits, and really focus again on you know, their health. We know that from our experience that 80 to 90% of folks' ailments are diet related, and for us to address that at all, being able to engage with them face to face has been really, really key. Slide 4, health and nutrition education. So another pillar of our food program, and is a trend going on with a lot of food banks and food programs, is that we want to focus not just on the distribution of goods, where we focus on the produce and healthy food, but education. We found right away when we went in this direction almost 7 years ago that as we waned the amount of high fats, high sugars, high salts foods that people really liked and were addicted to, we handed them a beet, for example, and they were like, what the heck do I do with this? So by really focusing on that second pillar, we found that, again, that engagement piece, it really, really is starting to work. So our approach to health and nutrition education at every mobile location, again, 12 in the region, we have on-site health and nutrition classes and education. We partner with the University of California and the California State University that provides on-site nurses and interns from the nutrition area to talk to folks about what type of foods that we're distributing, how to use it. The nutrition interns really focus on, you know, the healthy benefits and what literally very simple recipes on how to utilize the food. Example, we grow a lot of kale here, we distribute a lot of kale here, and we distribute a lot of beets, but I'll tell you, kale and beets are the two, among others, that are really challenging for the folks that we serve. So the more on-site education and demonstrations and tastings that we can work with these folks, they tend to come back, enjoy the food, and again, obviously there's healthy benefits to that. We provide recipe cards, really nice recipe cards for folks to take home, and then we have cooking classes. Another area of our health and nutrition education is we built, as part of the strategic plan, an organic garden next to our main facility. And again, it was just our way to show folks the benefits of healthy eating, actually where their food comes from. A quick story I like to tell is one time at one of our distributions, we were giving out red bell peppers, and we had lots of people come up to us and thought that red meant that it was spoiled. They'd only seen a green bell pepper. So we know, and kids, you know, if they get a chance to eat an apple versus a Twinkie, I could tell you probably 8 out of the 10 kids probably didn't know that the apple came from a tree. So, you know, our demonstration garden really teaches folks where their food comes from, the benefits of eating, and then we focus really on how to grow your own food, including how to store fresh produce, how to cook it, and then we have a group of volunteers that go out and help with neighborhood garden builds. We feel that these classes, this hands-on approach, inspires folks, really begins to rethink their habits, and we've just been awestruck on the amount of people that have taken an interest in this. Slide 5, I wanted to talk really quickly about our organization specifically and how we're unique. A lot of food banks don't have multifaceted programs. You heard from me and the introduction that we do a lot of education services. We are a blend of both direct and indirect, meaning that we actually pride ourselves on actually working face-to-face with clients. But like other food banks, we also provide indirect service to over 40 agencies that go out and take the food to folks. We distribute 5 million pounds of food annually. 2 million of that is fresh produce. We hope within the next 2 years we can double that number. And then, as mentioned earlier, the backbone of our organization, as many of the organizations probably that are listening to this, is our volunteers. We have north of 5,000 volunteers, and they come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, whether they're retired nurses, they're young people, they are working professionals with children. I can tell you that our mobile format for our food program has absolutely exploded the amount of young volunteers and young families that want to bring their kids out. They really seem to like being face-to-face and hands-on versus being in a room and handing food through a window. And then the last thing I'll mention is that we are in partnership with Soil-Borne Farms. It's a small organic farm in Sacramento, and we partner on a program called Harvest Sacramento, where we recruit volunteers during the weekend that we first fly our neighborhoods, and then we go back to those neighborhoods and we pick the fruit from neighborhood trees, bring it back to the food bank, and we distribute that as well. In fact, last year we distributed almost 50,000 pounds of fruit specifically by that program, Harvest Sacramento. So, new approach. As I said earlier, you know, we're kind of multifaceted. So one approach is that we want to focus on our food program and being part of an overall larger food system. Like was mentioned earlier, we know that we have expertise, we know that we have existing infrastructure, and we know that we could incubate and work as an aggregation kind of facility to help open new markets and get more food out there. I'd mentioned that our relationships moving forward will be key with farmers. We have tons of small farmers within a 40 to 60 mile radius that are working with us, and you know, it's mutually beneficial. We purchase from them. We don't just ask for donations, and what we have found is it really has increased the reciprocity and the farmer, whether large or small, really goes out of their way to providing us with really good produce. And then there's opportunities, obviously, with seconds and blemish stuff that we all know is perfectly good, but it may not look perfect on a store shelf. Where we're headed. This is a picture of two of our volunteers in a very basic neighborhood. You can see that. The fence behind them, you can see, is surrounded by a church parking lot. Where we're headed is we want to be looked at nationally as a food program that really is focusing on people's health, that is engaging the community and building community, and therefore people that are, whether they're donors or volunteers, can really look at our organization and really want to invest their time and money because we are taking this type of an approach. Where we're headed is that we have been fortunate to financially be a very strong organization. We're getting ready to triple our cold storage and completely renovate our existing hub. We want to triple the amount of fresh produce that we are distributing. And we want to work with other organizations, like you'll hear from David with Sacramento Area Council of Governments, to really look at how we can enhance the existing food system, and but for us, really focus on food insecurity and food access for low-income folks. And then in terms of the bigger picture, we're going to have somebody come up really quick and talk, but bigger picture for us is, again, just to really be part of this regional food approach, to really, help people with access, but also to help educate our community about how there's access issues, but also there's health issues that are very directly related to the food people are eating. So that's a little bit about Sacramento Food Bank and Family Services.
Thanks, Blake. That was nicely done. We got a good feel for where you've been and where you're going and what you have to offer there. As Blake mentioned, our next presenter is David Shabazian. Dave is also working in the Sacramento area, and I think what he does dovetails in with what we just heard from Blake. David's been with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments for 13 years in a number of roles. He's currently the program manager for the Rural-Urban Connection Strategy, which is a regional effort to enhance rural economic viability and environmental sustainability, something I know near and dear to all of our hearts. In the past, he was the deputy project manager for the Blueprint Transportation Land Use Study. He's also been the lead on floodplain management and water resources issues. David's a past member of the California Health Food Financing Initiative Advisory Group. He's a member of the YOLO Agriculture and Food Alliance, a graduate of California Ag Leadership Foundation, a board member of the Sacramento Food Bank and Family Services, whom we just heard from Blake, and a member of the External Advisory Committee for Selection of the Dean of the College of Agriculture and Environmental Science at UC Davis. So quite a broad background. David, glad to have you with us. Go right ahead.
Well, thanks for having me here, and good afternoon to everyone. So I am going to provide a backdrop for some of the stuff that Blake talked about, the region's effort to build out a regional food system and using food banks as a launching point for that. So I'm going to provide you some of the background for the Rural Urban Connection Strategy Project, or RUCS project, because that technical work has led us to the need to study in further detail the needs and operations of a food bank, or pardon me, a food hub, starting out of a food bank, as one of the key strategies for enhancing rural economic viability. As we all know, one of the main industries for many of our rural communities is agriculture. In our region, it's also forestry as you move up toward Lake Tahoe. So when we talk about enhancing rural economic viability, we're really talking about agriculture and trying to find ways to create more value in the landscape and more value out of the food system for our growers and for our food entrepreneurs in our region. So that second bullet there is, obviously how you start any major project is what are the challenges and what are the opportunities. And as we're all aware, there's plenty of opportunities in food and agriculture, but there are also plenty of challenges out there here in California: water supply, labor supply, land supply, regulations. So certainly there's again, a great opportunity out there, but there are a lot of hurdles that we have to get over in order to capitalize on those opportunities. The project is also looking at a lot of technical work to make sure that we understand where we're going. I think that a lot of times we get caught in ideological objectives and discussions and conversations, and we don't have good technical work behind what we're talking about in order for us to make good decisions. And a mantra at SACOG is better information for better decision making, and we really stick to that with our board and with stakeholders throughout the region. And so we're developing a lot of data about agriculture, a lot of economic modeling so that we understand if our strategies that we're starting to gravitate toward make sense or not at the end of the day. Are we going to make more money out of those strategies? Are we going to create a better environment for our farmers and for our food entrepreneurs, or are we going in the wrong direction? And so it's important for us to really stand on good data and good modeling in order to answer those questions. And then that last bullet is kind of SACOG's bread and butter. We are the region's transportation planning organization, and that transportation plan is built upon changes that we are forecasting in the land use patterns and the economy here in the region. Our transportation dollars are very limited, so we have to spend them wisely, and it's important for us to understand how the region is going to change, both in our urban areas and in our rural areas. And so this project is trying to answer those questions about the rural parts of our region so that we can make good investments in the transportation system. This is how we get food to market. This is how people go out and visit farms and other agritourism sites. So it's a really, really important part of the infrastructure that is going to help make agriculture more viable here in this region. So as I mentioned, we're looking at all aspects of viability. One of those is the opportunities that we see in these local and regional food markets. This isn't, I want to make sure we have perspective that this is a very small part of our food system today, and I'm going to show you a slide about that. So a lot of what the RUX project is working on is kind of more of what we'll call conventional or production agriculture, but we do see this as a really good opportunity, and a lot of farmers trying to figure out how to get into this local and regional market. And so most of what I'm going to talk about today is our technical work on understanding that market and trying to figure out ways to capitalize on that. So it's not just for small farms, but for all farms out there to be able to capitalize on these opportunities. So as I mentioned, we're a region that is producing about 3.4 million tons a year. That production matches up against our consumption, which is about 1.9 million tons a year. So that looks pretty good, right? We can feed ourselves, supposedly. But in this region, that means you would mostly subsist on rice, processing tomatoes, a little bit of stone fruit, some nuts, and you would wash it down with wine. So if that's your diet, then move to Sacramento, because this is the place where you want to be. The reality is that less than 2% of what people are consuming in this region is actually grown in this region. It's just the nature of the food system. We export most of what we grow out to national and international markets, and we're importing a lot of what we eat. So you can just imagine, you see trucks on the highway driving into Sacramento with food that we eat and driving out of Sacramento with food that we've grown here, and it's going out to be processed somewhere else and sent out to markets all over the country, if not the world. So this is where we really started thinking and seeing that the opportunity in these food systems that are locally and regionally oriented. If we can feed ourselves more of the food that we grow here and process more of the food that we eat here, then we're capturing more of that value in the food system, and that's been the main driver of this food system, is how do we get more value out of our food production and our processing the value-added processing to capture that value here in this region, create jobs, and get more of that value out of the food system. So here's what we're doing today, right? We're basically going directly into markets, farmers markets, community-supported agriculture, boxes, a little bit to restaurants, a little bit to grocery stores, but it's farmers basically going, loading up their truck and going directly into a market and dropping that off. They're getting the retail price for their product, which is great. That means that they're getting top dollar for what they're growing. But we just simply can't imagine a food system working like that, where we have every farmer driving into a market and dropping off product. Grocery stores don't want that, and it's really not economically efficient for farmers or for really anyone in the region. What we're starting to see is farmers are aggregating themselves. So we have pockets of production here in the region where the farmers are getting together to put together CSA boxes or greater volume so they can get into bigger markets. What we're really interested in moving toward, though, is a regional food system, and the linchpin to that being a regional food hub that aggregates that product, processes it, and gets it out to market. So we're looking at everything from the fresh market to the processed product that many consumers are used to. So this is kind of a schematic of how the progression that we hope to move toward, going from left to right. And so the thing that we have to do is understand, how does this system work? So we have production there on the left, linked to consumption over on the right, and that critical component is the infrastructure. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides that we have done a lot of technical work to understand the production side. We've mapped out the crops in our region, and we've looked at the economics of growing those crops. And on the consumption side, we understand the amount and type of food that people are consuming, and we've actually translated that into the land needed in production to serve that demand. It's that infrastructure part that we're working on now, and that's that critical missing piece. And so we need to understand, how does that infrastructure work at a scale that fits within the region? Is that an economically viable option? And I'll show you a little bit of that work in just a few minutes here. So I mentioned that we've mapped out our crops. This map is somewhat novel. We have looked high and low across this country and only found a few places that map out their crops, and most of those are in California. But none have done it as as broadly and as comprehensively as we've done here in Sacramento, in the Sacramento region. A good example is this red here that you see on the map. That big swath of red, that's processing tomato production. So that's all the pastes and the salsas and ketchup and so forth that is on your shelf. A lot of that comes out of California. In fact, most of that comes out of California, and we've got a pretty good chunk of that production here in this region. That's rotated with other crops, so it's not just processing tomatoes. It's alfalfa, it's beans, it's other crops that are rotated in with that crop. But the long and the short is, we have on a field-by-field basis now an inventory of the crops that are being grown in our region. So we know now where we can go to find melons. We know where we can go to find leafy greens. We know where that stuff is, and we're able to now have an inventory of what we're growing here. Helps us understand then the gap between what we're growing and what the demand is. We also are, this slide will advance. Seem to be having some trouble getting the slide to move here.
Looks like it just moved, David.
Okay. So as I mentioned, we need to make sure we understand the economics of growing this food. This slide is oriented toward the small farms, which are seen as kind of the main suppliers to these food hubs. Our analysis says that may not work, frankly, as you move up in volume, because if you look at this first bar here is all direct market. If you start moving into wholesale markets, which is represented by this green, or your bundle of markets actually includes institutions or wholesale, this black line here shows the profit curve, and it drops substantially as you move out of the retail market and into the wholesale market or the institutional market. So this is for a 20-acre farm. We are guessing that those farms will stay mostly in the retail space just based off of that profit curve. But as you start to look at larger farms, let's go up to, say, a 60-acre farm. Again, if the slide will advance. Here we go. So a 60-acre farm, again, they're going to make most of their money selling direct to consumer. But this slide demonstrates that they also could start to operate in these wholesale spaces because they are starting to trade off their manual labor for mechanized labor, so their costs per acre are going down. And they can tap into these untapped markets that are ready for locally grown food. Our schools and our hospitals they're doing whatever they can to get locally grown food, and yet the supply really isn't out there. So the need for this hub is continuing to grow. It seems at an exponential rate. We hear more and more people trying to get that product, and they just can't find it. So basically, this scale issue is really, really important. This is to say that we are relying on all farms to supply a food hub, and we are thinking that that is going to be generally bigger farms to hit that lower price point. We need to have bigger farms who are going to trade off margins for volume and be able to operate in that space and do so competitively. So consumption, we have really done a lot of heavy lifting on calculating our consumption. We're using national databases to estimate that. There's a database coming out of two national sources, the Loss Adjusted Food Availability as well as the Food Intake Converted to Retail Commodities database. The combination of those two has landed us on these estimates of retail weight and primary weight, the primary weight being the weight of the product as it comes off the field. So we know now how much product we need to grow to serve our needs here in the region, and we can translate that then into the land needs to grow that food. So if we go from that less than 2% today, and let me see if I can get the slide to advance again. So if we go from that less than 2% to say 20%, which is the second bar from the left on this graph, we estimate that we need about 88,000 acres to do that. Now the caveat here, this doesn't include meat consumption or dairy, but everything else, and particularly what we can grow in this region, we estimate to hit a 20% local benchmark, we need about 88,000 acres to do that. So, you know, going up to 50%, we would need 220,000 acres. But now at least we have guidance. We know what we're talking about in terms of land supply in order for us to start feeding ourselves more and more food right here in the region. Okay, so all of this work led up to the project that I'm going to touch on for the remainder of this presentation, and that is the food hub work that we're doing. We really want to understand the economics and the feasibility of having a regional food hub or series of aggregation points and a food hub here in the region. As I mentioned, we have a lot of demand out there, but we don't have the supply. And so the impediment is we just simply don't have the kinds of aggregation and processing that we need to meet the greater and greater demands for locally grown food here in the Sacramento region. And I'm going to add to that the Bay Area, because the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area is our neighbor. 9 million people over there, pretty high level of income, and a big demand for locally grown food. So we're thinking about this not only for the Sacramento region, but for also serving the adjacent region to us, the Bay Area. So our goals are to develop products to capitalize on new market opportunities. We want to understand what works and what doesn't in order for us to take advantage of those opportunities. And what our consultants are basically working on is a pro forma tool so that we can turn dials on that model and understand different conditions of a food hub and see what works and what doesn't, and a business plan for that food hub and a phasing strategy for building up a food system that, again, starts, we think, at a food bank and moves on from there. So we are looking at food banks because, again, as Blake mentioned, they have a lot of infrastructure. If you think about what a food bank does, they are basically an aggregation distribution facility. And so we see opportunity there to get the ball rolling. You know, it's really a matter of keeping the costs down to get this whole thing started, and that's the role that the food banks can play in this region. And we're fortunate that we have the Sacramento Food Bank as well as the YOLO Food Bank, in particular those two, with large facilities, adding new capacity, and being very entrepreneurial about how they serve their clients, and looking for opportunities to not serve just their clients but also the greater community. I think that's a really important difference that we have in this region is our food banks are working with a whole range of stakeholders to figure out, does it make sense? How do we make this work? How do we get more food out not only to our clients but to the greater community? And so that leveraging of their existing assets, their loading docks and their cold storage and their trucks and their drivers and everything else they do to move food the way they do today, we're hoping we can leverage that to get the ball rolling on a greater food system. So where do they fit in? Well, we have the consultants that are working on our food hub analysis have basically laid out a phasing strategy. And if I can get the slide to advance. So phase one is just getting the aggregation distribution component up and running. As we move into phase two, we are looking at scaling up, some more volume, and starting to add some light processing, basically fresh cut product. As we move into phase three, we're talking about even greater volumes, as well as adding additional processing lines, starting to freeze or dry products and other types of processing. And then as we move into phase four, it's really just a continued expansion of that processing capacity and volume. So where do the food banks fit in here? Well, definitely, again, the aggregation and distribution component to this is critical to get started, and that's where the food banks have the capacity and the expertise to start doing that today. As we move forward into phase two, if given the space that they may have, some light processing is possible by the food banks, that fresh cut product. And even in, for example, in the YOLO Food Bank, they've got a new 30,000 square foot facility where they could do even more processing, and they're trying to figure out ways to do that. So this analysis that we're working on is helping not only the region but the food banks get more food out to people that's grown right here in the region. And I'm still having trouble advancing these slides, so maybe what I'll do is just...
David, this is John.
Okay.
We're getting short on time here, so if you could bring us home on it.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to mention was just, as Blake mentioned, they're targeting, their services already target the food deserts. We've done analysis of food deserts in the region to identify where they are. So we can use that information to link in with more communities and help them figure out how to get better food access. And I probably just am going to stop there since we're out of time, and I'm having trouble getting these slides to advance.
Thanks, David. That was great. I'm sure some of the other points you wanted to make will probably come up during questions. Let's move right along to Mitch Gruber. Mitch is the Food Access Programs Manager at FoodLink, which is the Feeding America Regional Food Bank located in Rochester, New York. Mitch manages many of the initiatives that allows FoodLink to go beyond food banking, including 12 farm stands, a mobile market, and a healthy corner store initiative. He's helped FoodLink develop critical relationships with regional farms, processors, and food hubs in central and western New York. In addition to his work at FoodLink, Mitch is completing a doctoral degree in American history from the University of Rochester, and his dissertation is about the municipality's role in food distribution in the 19th and 20th century in America. How apropos. Through his work at FoodLink and his research, Mitch aims to demonstrate the ways that existing infrastructure can be used to create a more equitable food system. So Mitch, take us to Rochester.
Okay. First of all, thanks for having me. John, Jeff, really appreciate it, and really looking forward to giving this presentation, because this is something that we've been doing quite a bit of lately. It's just trying to get out in front of other food banks and other food hubs and other people involved in the food system to talk less about programs and more about kind of the philosophical changes, the philosophical approach that we've taken to really shift our model from food bank to food hub. So I appreciate everything that David and Blake said, and it was very research and program specific. I'm going to be looking a little more at the philosophical side of things. So to start, I will give you a quick snapshot of FoodLink. We were founded in 1978 by Tom Ferrara, who's still our CEO and executive director today, and really one of the founders nationally of food banks. We are part of the Feeding America network, which it separates us from what you heard from Blake before. Feeding America is an umbrella organization with 200 some odd food banks across the nation. What it does is it affords us quite a bit of purchasing power and a role in a larger network. This is our the graphic you see right here. This is our service area. We're in Western New York. We have 10 counties, about 5,700 square miles. Within that, we have about 500 community partners that consist of emergency and non-emergency agencies. When I say partners, I mean really our network of agencies. And emergency agencies are places like soup kitchens, food pantries, homeless shelters, places that literally serve as the net of the safety net, places where people go to eat if they're lacking anything else to eat. The non-emergency agencies are really where we see a lot of growth, and I'll talk about this more momentarily. But these are other 501c3 nonprofits, places where people, largely food insecure population, are going, but not necessarily to eat, but food is part of it. So you look at group homes, daycare, senior centers. And within of these 500 community partners, we actually served 16.7 million pounds of food this past year. We do have over 30 food-related programs and 65 full-time staff. So that's just a snapshot of who we are as a food bank. Let me talk about kind of the catalyst for what helped us to decide to shift our model. And really, you could point to the recession. The recession starting in 2008 really saw two things happen: an increase in hunger, an increase in the demand for our services, and a decrease in donated product. Specifically, I won't talk specifically, but broadly, when you talk about a decrease in donated product, manufacturers simply can't make the same errors that they once made. There's a rise in tertiary markets all over the place, where retail damage used to come to food banks are now going to tertiary markets. But the point is that between the increased demand and the decreased donated product, we really had to kind of reshift our focus. And the silver lining is that it really made us stronger as an organization. We built new programs, we developed more staff, and perhaps most importantly, we moved into a new building, really a state-of-the-art facility. I'll show you a picture momentarily. But with this new building, our director, our founder, Tom Ferrara, really helped hammer home the point that we needed to make sure that we were utilizing our assets and resources to work 24/7 to be impacting on the cause of hunger rather than just 8-5 to work on the symptom. And I'm going to get back to that momentarily, but that's really the governing mantra that's led us to shift our model. So here's a very simplistic graphic about what this means. So I want to look at the top there. You see food bank to food hub, consumer driven. So a lot of the folks who are probably listening right now and who are part of the National Good Food Network have heard a lot of talk about food hubs and what food hubs mean. And the great work that the Wallace Center and the USDA has done has really developed a notion of food hubs and specifically, for the most part, from a producer point of view. So these food hubs are ways to help small to mid-sized growers access markets that were historically difficult to access. The work that we're doing, the food hub that we're trying to establish here, is really more of a consumer-driven food hub. We're looking at the individuals out there who have a difficult time accessing the market as consumers, not as producers. So the way that actually manifests itself is if you look at the slide here, whereas the food bank has a charitable model, right? There's a lot of donated food coming in and food coming out at no cost to the client. Some of the same stuff that Blake was talking about in his presentation. The food hub is really more about social enterprise. We're going out, we're purchasing food, and we're finding different ways, different forums, and different customers to resell to them. And I want to make this point clear here because I'm going to have to make it one way or another. We don't ever sell donated food. It's really critical for us to make sure that we're keeping the two avenues of food very separate and distinct. But when we go out and we're buying food directly from local farmers, local producers, we're then going to go ahead and find different social enterprises, which I'll talk about later, to resell that food, to bring wholesale prices into underserved institutions, underserved neighborhoods. So going down the graph there, you see that food banking is inherently a passive organization. Not necessarily in a bad way, it's not a pejorative term, but passive in the sense that we're receiving donated food and we're reacting to what's donated to us, to what's in our network. Whereas the food hub is proactive. We can go out and we can say, okay, we know there's certain foods that we need to source. We know there's certain commodities we need to have. We're going to go get it in whatever way that we need to get it. And again, once again, this is really the mantra that drives everything home. The food bank is responding to symptoms. Hunger relief is imperative. The work that food banks do around the country is absolutely critical. But hunger relief is not addressing root causes. And what we're trying to do with the food hub is get out in front through innovative programs to address the root causes of hunger. So I just want to talk now about the key components of our shifted model. The first is just it's an acknowledgement that traditional food banking does not end hunger. And once again, that does not mean that hunger relief is not important, because it absolutely is. But the governing ideas and philosophy that have helped us make these shifts, make this transition that we've made, is that traditional food banking is not going to end it of itself. We have to think of new creative ways to really look at the root causes. And with the rest of these components, I'm going to go through slide by slide. So the first one, stewardship of assets. So as Blake and David talked about, food banks are institutions that have a good amount of assets and resources. Obviously, it changes based on where you are and how big your facility is and how many people you serve. But I'll talk about FoodLink specifically. We have a state-of-the-art warehouse facility. This is the outside of the building. This picture with the arrow is the closest thing I could come to really showing the scope. But as you can see, it's a large warehouse, and we have quite a bit of space, including a 3,700 square foot cooler, a 5,200 square foot freezer. And off campus, we have a 10,000 square foot commercial kitchen that produces about 3,000 meals a day. In addition to all of that, we also have a fleet of trucks that go out and make deliveries, that pick up donated food, and we have a lot of the soft infrastructure as well, like inventory systems. We have a great workforce here. And again, some of the soft infrastructure is critical relationships. So our goal is to make sure that we're using these assets 24/7. Because when the lights get turned off at 5 o'clock at night, that cooler and that freezer is still running. So we need to figure out a way that we can make sure that cooler and that freezer, that the gear we have in that commercial kitchen is impacting the most people that it can at all times. The second key component is a diversified customer base. So as I was talking about with the non-emergencies, a lot of these are organizations and agencies that historically have gone and shopped retail. If you think of, for example, if you think of group homes, oftentimes historically the staff of the group home would take their clients, take the residents across the street, and go shop retail. Well, unfortunately, we live in an era right now where there's no human service organization that's not worried about a slashed and reduced budget. So, and we know from research that food costs are typically the third biggest cost center behind personnel and facilities. We never want to see personnel and facilities cut. So it's our job as a food bank to try to make sure that we can extend people's food dollars. And that's really what led us into what we call our cooperative purchasing program, where we buy things in very large volumes, keep the price point down, and we don't have to mark it up like the for-profit distributors will do. It's that very philosophy, that very program, that really helped us start to get more and more into produce, because these group homes aren't just buying canned goods, peanut butter, things like that. We know that everyone's going through tomatoes. We know everyone's going through apples. And if we can go out and we can make sure that we're keeping those dollars on local farms and we're helping our agencies get them at a good cost, then we know we're doing the right thing. So in addition, once we're purchasing more food, we can really help folks not just stretch their food dollars, but actually to menu plan and to budget accordingly. Because no longer are people waiting to react to the donated foods we have in our inventory stream. They can plan on what it is to do. And again, our food hub programs also allow us to work directly with individuals and for-profits when we work with corner stores. So it's really a diversified customer base. And I'm already running short on time, so I'm just going to say in terms of investing in the local economy, one of the assets that food banks have is purchasing power. And we know that we go and we buy quite a bit of food, we buy quite a bit of product. Every time we can keep things local, we know we're doing the right thing for our region and for the individuals in our network. And truly, there's no way to get a bigger bang for our buck in terms of economic development than by buying local agricultural product, which is precisely why this past year we spent over $250,000 on local farms, at local farms. So the next key component is market-based solutions. Again, the charitable model of taking in donated food, giving out donated food is critical in terms of hunger relief. But if we really want to get to the deeper problems, really want to look at the root causes, we needed to figure out new ways to distribute our product. And the reason why I put this Wallace Center publication here is because and this just came out recently, I think you guys did a great job. One of the reasons we put this here is because they spend 2 or 3 pages talking about the value chain. And that's absolutely critical for us. If we're going to actually make inroads into underserved, low-income neighborhoods, we need to make sure that we're building a value chain so that it's not just, when we bring in local apples, we know that people really are going to buy them. Let's say the corner stores start carrying apples. We want to be able to have data that suggests people are willing to spend money on local agricultural product. And that's why we're part of groups like Farm to Institution New York State. That's why we run our food access programs. And we really do believe that all food banks should be involved in economic development work. The next key component is health over hunger. Part of this really started because we're part of a Center for Disease Control initiative in Rochester called HEART. And we learned very quickly that this is not just an economic development issue. Obviously, it's really a public health issue as well. You've already heard all about the health disparities. And I'll just say this much, so I'm not repeating things Blake and David already said. We make sure that we always are trying to build food literacy. And food literacy means more than just nutrition education, and it means more than just food access. It's really a combination of all those things and more, which is why health over hunger is really one of our major components. So some examples are food access programs. You see on the bottom here, this is me with 2 women that I've been selling produce for about 4 years now, every Sunday over the course of the summer in a park in a very low-income part of Rochester. There never will be a farmer's market in this neighborhood, or maybe I shouldn't say never. There hasn't been in a long time, and it'll be a long time until there is one. The reason being because there simply isn't the profits for farmers to make. But it's our job as a consumer-driven food hub to go out, find the local farms, find the local product, aggregate it, and bring it in and set up these. We have 12 different farm stands, 12 different pop-up markets. We also have our curbside market, which you saw a photo of earlier, that really is allowing us to reach the elderly, disabled, and people who are lacking mobility by bringing a farmer's market right to their door. I don't really have time to talk about the Healthy Corner Store Initiative, which is in its pilot phases right now. But as you can imagine, when we talk about leveraging assets, it's clear to understand how the corner stores fit in. So future steps. We really want to do some value-added processing. We already have one really great success story, which is where we're slicing and bagging apples for Wayne County schools. Wayne County is the second biggest apple producing county in the country. They couldn't secure their own Wayne County apples. Why? Because the distribution channels are just skewed. So we went in, we sourced Wayne County apples, we're bringing them to our kitchen, we're chopping, we're slicing, we're bagging, and we're distributing right back to them. Once we get some more value-added processing infrastructure, IQF machine, for example, we'll really be able to ratchet up what we do with our value-added processing. So I'm gonna end just with this slide right here. This is really what I hope to impart on everyone and everyone that we give this spiel to. All food banks have millions of dollars of food-related infrastructure. There's no doubt about it, whether it's the trucks, the coolers, or the freezers, and we need to make sure we're leveraging this infrastructure to be good partners in local food movements. And keep in mind that a lot of food banks are already working with low-income clients, low-income individuals and institutions, which oftentimes are left out of the good food movements. And rely on your local food bank to kind of be that inroad into this clientele, into these demographics. And the final piece is really what I want to make sure that folks understand that is our philosophy at FoodLink, and probably what separates us from a lot of other food banks, is that we really do understand that charity alone is not going to end hunger. Again, that's not to disparage hunger relief, but we really want to make sure that we're using our assets and resources all the time, nonstop, to form partnerships like with USDA and the Wallace Center to really fix the food system so it's more equal, so that everyone has access to the right foods and food literacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. That's a great presentation, and you kindly left us some time for questions here. So we've got a set of questions to dig into. Let me first make an observation and see if this leads to a question that answers a number of the ones that I see here. I think all of you talked about processing to some extent, and I know that food hubs across the country are looking at processing, but some of them are quite challenged by it. It's a whole other set of investments. It's a whole other skill set. Often leads to deeper regulatory issues. I'd like to ask all of you to think about and respond to, what do you see the role for processing? I see some of you are looking at it as an opportunity. Some of you are doing it now. Do you think food banks are uniquely suited to fill that role in processing, and if so, how? And how large of a role do you see it in your work in the future?
Yeah, I'd like to. This is Mitch speaking. I'd like to respond to that. So I'm going to look at upstate New York here, for example. We don't have any facilities for small to mid-sized farmers to process, for small to mid-sized distributors or food hubs to get their products processed. And one of the reasons for that is because, certainly unlike in Sacramento, here the growing season is half the year. So for a small startup to want to start doing processing, the fact of the matter is that they have to figure out how to have a business that really isn't doing much for 5, maybe only 4 months out of the year. What's unique about FoodLink, and I think what most food banks can say in some capacity, is that we already have a lot of the infrastructure to mitigate that fact. So for us, we have a commercial kitchen, which I didn't talk about much, but needless to say, when you're preparing 3,000 meals a day, you already have a lot of what is necessary, and you're already working. All we have to do is put on a second shift once we get the IQF machine in order to make the value-added processing center work. So I think that's really what allows us as a food bank. I don't know about other ones that don't have a commercial kitchen, but it's what allows us to be really set to begin doing some serious processing.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. Blake or David?
This is David. So the processing component from the analysis that we're doing is critical to profitability. The aggregation distribution component is pretty tough to make profitable as a standalone operation. So to the extent that the food banks have the capacity within their structures to be a home for this processing, it could be a good place to do it, but it's really up to the food banks as to whether that fits their model or not. As I mentioned, the YOLO Food Bank is actually looking at processing as one of the functions that they want to put into their new facility. For the Sacramento Food Bank, I think it's more a question of space availability to do that. And again, these are components that cost money. And so, finding partners to help pay for that infrastructure and the labor that goes into it is going to be a consideration. But the trajectory that we have for the region is that eventually this food hub would move out of the food banks and into a standalone facility being driven by the high volumes that we anticipate. And so at that point, it would be, processing would be a natural component of the food hub, just because that's the way that the numbers, we see the numbers working better for a standalone facility that doesn't require any kind of subsidies or any other any other funding that to make it work, that it can actually be a standalone business.
Right, so it's part of the business plan.
Right.
Anything to add, Blake?
Well, I would just say, it's not our forte. I think it's definitely needed, as David said, but we're going to focus on a commercial kitchen that can provide some processing, but really we're more in the business of education. I do think, as David said, we have limited space, but we are looking at a small bit of processing right now as part of the renovation. But again, for us, our focus is sourcing good food, storing it, and getting it out. I like what Mitch said about some value-added stuff, and also I don't think there's anything wrong with sourcing food, paying for a little bit, and being able to create a revenue stream. I think that's a great way to diversify your revenue, and I think that's, quite frankly, the way of the future. In terms of processing for us, David and I have talked greatly about how we could enhance our operation by doing that. I just think we're not quite there yet.
Yeah. Okay, great. Good to hear. Here's a question probably for all of you as well. A number of questions asking about, looking for advice for food banks that are hesitant to become fully engaged in the local food system, supporting local farming, kind of going beyond, I think, what are traditional or core functions. So what advice you might offer to folks that might want to be doing what you're doing? Maybe talk a little bit about what is it that motivates, say, the directors of these hubs that allows you guys to expand and look beyond traditional roles.
Well, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. We, as Mitch mentioned earlier, we are a agency of Feeding America, so we are an eligible recipient, but that's not where we focus the majority of our food moving forward. It's a little scary. I think we have the blessing of, and the weather and the fact that in Sacramento and California we can grow this beautiful food year-round. Where we're situated in the Sacramento region, there's a lot of farms around. And I had mentioned earlier that we're not really government funded. 2% out of 100, and that is in the form of food. So I would say we're nimble. We were able to kind of simultaneously, as we were keeping to this traditional model, go out and begin to talk to farmers, bring them in. I think a lot of farmers, for us, were very interested in how we were serving once we went mobile. And then I think some of the smaller farmers just, they already had philosophically, as Mitch said, a lot of the smaller farmers were already working in kind of food access, food security kind of issues. So I would say regardless, hire somebody or spend a certain portion of your time trying to add value and add to the local food movement, because I just think from a donor perspective you will gain a ton, and I just think it's really the right way to go.
This is David. Just kind of piggybacking on what Blake said. I don't want to speak for Blake or for any of the other food bank directors in our region, but there's been a recognition in this region over the last few years that diversification is really important for the food banks, not only financially, but obviously for the food that they're putting out to their clients. All of our food banks in our region are gravitating as much as possible toward fresh product going out to their clients, because giving out food isn't it's part of the solution, but if you're giving out food that isn't very healthy, you're filling bellies, but you're not improving the health of the community. and all of the food banks in our region. And I will say, Blake in particular, they're putting a big emphasis on getting out to the community and helping with overall community health. And so in order to do that, you really have to develop partnerships with farmers and get that food in directly at the lowest price possible. And so the hub idea is really kind of a natural progression of those efforts going on throughout the region. So yeah, it is a leap, and there's risk involved, and it's a little scary, but there's also a lot of upside opportunity. And because we had the good fortune of getting money from both the state of California as well as USDA to do all the technical work to understand how to make this work, we're alleviating some of that fear and getting a better understanding of how do you navigate this and how can you make it at least break even, if not even a little bit profitable, and plowing those profits back into the food bank so that you can help more people in the community.
Yeah, and this is Mitch. I would just end that question by saying, ultimately, for us, we have really progressive board of directors. Our founder and CEO has been doing this for a really long time, and he noticed, looking back, that not much has gotten necessarily better in the 35, 40 years he was doing it, and needed to think of how we can think outside the box and really look down the line and have a progressive point of view of what food banks should be doing. And anyone who's experiencing a lack of traction by trying to work with their local food bank, make the case. It's really hard to say that anyone whose mission is ending hunger, it's hard to believe that any of them would truly think that simply a charitable model without moving beyond traditional food banking is going to work. So if it's not working, at first ask, make the case. Point to other models out there that are working. Point to success stories, and hopefully, when we have this conversation again in 10 years, the entire model of food banking has shifted a bit.
Yeah, good. Mitch, let's stick with you for a minute. There's a question here about purchasing power of the food bank. So tell me a little bit about how you might have, I think last time I talked to you when we were in D.C., you were talking about some pretty small farmers market type things, but now it sounds like you've expanded your purchasing power. So the question is around how did you do that, right? How's it going? And then also tell me a little bit about the contractual arrangement with the growers. Are you paying them full price? Are they paying something else? Are you paying them quicker? Tell me a little bit about the relationship with the growers and how you expanded your purchasing power.
Yeah. So first of all, in terms of the purchasing power, it's not as though we necessarily expanded our purchasing power. It's really that, like I said in the presentation, we had to react to, if not decreasing, at least consistent or stagnant streams of donated food. So if the need is growing and donations aren't increasing, there's really only one way to address that, and that was by beginning to purchase more and more food. And again, when we really started to do more purchasing, the goal in mind wasn't necessarily to think about focusing on agriculture, but it became very apparent early on that we could do no better in terms of impacting on public health and economic development than by purchasing from farms. So we just began to allocate a lot of our resources that were possibly going other places, that were going to buy processed foods, and we really began to purchase more and more local agricultural products. Now, in terms of the actual relationships with the growers, I'd say that we really have very strong relationships with about 15 growers in our network. We're a very strong agricultural area here in upstate and western New York, and each relationship is different. But ultimately, we strive to make sure our growers understand where it is that the food is going to. And that doesn't mean that we necessarily want, we want people to say, okay, we're going to give you 50% discount because you're putting these into low-income neighborhoods. But we want to just work with them to understand that, hey, if you have field runs, if you have seconds, or if you have firsts and the retailer has an influx of them, think of us as the first place to go to purchase those things. And that's oftentimes what happens. Right now, this was an absolutely fantastic year for apples up here in upstate New York. And we have growers all the time who say, oh, we were supposed to send 10,000 pounds of apples into retailer X, but they already have too many apples because it's been such a bumper crop. Can you guys take them? And then we can work out a price that truly is much better than them dumping it. And obviously, it's a price that can help us make sure that we're getting them into low-income neighborhoods at an affordable cost, and it really works for everyone. So the key, as you can imagine, is really just building those right relationships with the farmers and going from there.
Yeah, that's good. Let's talk a little bit about, when we talk about food hubs in general, we know that they're a valuable player kind of in the value chain. Mitch, you kind of brought up this concept earlier. It's that supply chain that's held together by value and relationships. But they don't exist alone, right? So my question is around who are you all seeing as the key strategic partners for food banks and / food hubs in growing regional food systems, and why? Because none of you can do it all. You've got to do what you're best at. So who are those key partners you look to? Obviously the farmers are one, right? So beyond that, what are you seeing?
Well, I mean, this is Blake. I could certainly speak to David and I's relationship with our, Sacramento Area Council of Governments as a joint powers authority, and they're doing a ton of work on transportation, on processing, on the food system, and we're lucky to have a partnership with them where actually they're opening up a ton of doors to us, not just farmers, but they're also educating us on how to be, I would say, a more integral part of this system and look outside of just providing food access to low-income folks, but look at value-added products in a way to create some additional revenue. So that's kind of, I would say that's one of the big relationships we have.
Yeah, this is David, and I just want to kind of add on to that the stakeholder list, some of the usual suspects, but then some that are kind of unusual, I suppose. And as you mentioned, obviously farmers, but economic development coordinators, local planners, land use planners. We're working with folks who work on logistics and the existing distributors. We're working with elected officials, the chambers of commerce and other economic development organizations, because we're really trying to view this through a lens of economic opportunity. The last slide that I had that I wasn't able to show is that our region gets 16 cents on the dollar. For every dollar you spend on food, we get 16 cents. And we have lost a lot of our food infrastructure here. We're trying to bring that back and bring it back through, part of it through this food hub analysis. And so we're bringing in a lot of players in throughout the region who are interested in not only agriculture and food, but simply economic development and healthy communities. And so, the food banks have, connections to all the public health related organizations. And we also have our schools and our hospitals who want this food, and so they're players in this as well. And so there's just a huge range of stakeholders out there who are very interested in this, and all of whom will benefit from it in the long run.
Well, and real quick, this is Blake again. I would say our donors are demanding it. I mean, in terms of performance. I mean, they want really once they got a taste of this different model. They're opening up doors for us too. I mean, they really respect and really want us to grow this tremendously. And so, like David said, there's a ton of stakeholders, and our donors, just like probably Mitch's and a lot of others, they run the gamut from professional folks on the health side to government officials, et cetera. So this is really given. This model, not necessarily going mobile, but focusing on fresh and healthy food, has really opened doors just very broadly for us.
That's great. And so we've got time for one more question. It's kind of a visioning question here in terms of how big do you think this can get? I mean, where is this going for food banks? What's the fulfillment of the concept of the idea? Let's hear from all of you a little bit on that one.
Okay, sure. This is Mitch. I'll take a stab at it. I mean, you know, for us, really the goal of this presentation is to really show that food banks need to be critical partners in every food movement going on a national basis. And that could mean so many different things in so many different places. But what I know for sure is that we all, on this webinar and at the National Good Food Network Conference that's going to be coming up, everyone envisions a food system that really works equitably for everyone who lives in a region to have access to healthy and affordable food. And the way that is going to happen is obviously something that would take a lot more than the next 30 seconds for me to answer. But what I know for sure is that food banks can and should be a critical part of that. And if there are neighborhood organizations, if there are small startup food hubs, if there are public health organizations that are looking to make a dent on the inefficiencies in the food system, but have a really hard time figuring out how to actually make it happen, a really good place to start is by reaching out to your food bank and figuring out how to leverage those assets to develop some really key programming and initiatives that can really make a difference.
Thanks, Mitch. Others?
Well, Mitch did a great job. I don't have a lot to add, but I would just say, we are super excited to be considered what David and I refer to as an incubation spot. I mean, there's a lot of existing infrastructure and expertise that a food bank can lend to enhancing the food system. So we're just excited to be a part of it. And if it incubates for a while and moves on, then it sounds to me like it's been successful.
And this is David. I would just kind of again continue to add on to that. So the question is, how far can we take this? I would say as far as feasibly possible. I mean, if for example, I've mentioned the YOLO Food Bank having 30,000 square feet. I mean, they can pack a lot of capacity into that facility for not only aggregating fresh food but processing it. So, in some respect, the sky's the limit. I mean, you add that together with the Sacramento Food Bank and the other smaller food banks in our region, and you develop a lot of capacity for moving food from farm to fork. It's really a matter of what can these food banks handle and what do they want to handle. And then also, as Blake mentioned, right now we view them as really an incubation spot, but and so we're thinking that they will the functionality will move out of the food bank eventually. They'll still be plugged into the whole food hub and food system, but they won't be the kind of the center of attention, so to speak. It'll move to a standalone facility that is a hub. But that's not to say that that can't be at a food bank. If there is enough community support and donor support and other ways to fund this, that it makes sense that we just continue to build out at one or two of the food banks our food hub capacity and vision for this region, then we'll do it there. And if it really makes sense for us to move it off of those sites and into a standalone facility somewhere else, then that's how we'll do it. But it's really kind of, again, the logistics and the appetite for what's possible within a food bank.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you. That was great, David, and thank you to Blake and Mitch and to John. I hope that these inspirational stories have you thinking in new and deeper thoughts and working on getting more good food to all communities, perhaps working with your food bank in your area. I want to just give you some upcoming opportunities. I promise I'll be quick. And I actually want to thank the over 200 of you who've hung on. We went a little long today, but but thank you for sticking with us. I think that last bit was worth it. This webinar is being recorded and will be archived on our website along with the over 50 other webinars we've done in the past. Feel free to send others who you think would like to have heard this presentation and take some professional development time yourself and dig through our excellent archives. You can visit ngfn.org/webinars. This webinar should be up within a few business days. Our webinars are organized into topics if you look in the left-hand navigation area, so dig into whatever interests you. We offer our NGFN webinars on the third Thursday of each month at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Sign-up links are always at ngfn.org/webinars. We do have a date for the January webinar, and it's not the third Thursday, but we are still finalizing the topic. However, in February, Wholesome Wave will present their Food Hub Due Diligence Toolkit. One of the top challenges that Food Hubs reported in the NGFN Food Hub Collaboration's recent National Food Hub Survey was access to capital. This webinar is designed to educate both sides of the funding-financing equation. Funders and financiers need to understand what makes a solid, investable business poised to succeed, and this toolkit leads the way. On the other side, Food Hubs must understand what their potential sources of capital will be looking for, and so going through the toolkit will likely improve their understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of their businesses and to help understand how to access the capital that is so needed. You can let us know in our post-webinar survey if you'd like to be automatically registered. That may or may not be true. Let me explain our conundrum. We have been offering these webinars for a couple of years. We bring the country's experts on topics that are timely with inspirational and actionable content. We've been told many times that we should really charge for these webinars. Other organizations and companies charge very high fees for their webinars, but we are committed to making our content available to everyone and anyone. So if we were to charge, for instance, those nonprofits who most need it, most need assistance, they wouldn't have access. So please consider going to our global giving account. You can search for NGFN webinars and donating. You can also get more information in our post-webinar survey. Foodhub.info is was mentioned a couple times in the text portion of this webinar. It's a really a hub of information about food hubs, research, case studies, a map of many of the food hubs across the country. The NGFN Food Hub Collaboration is working closely with 9 food hubs across the country. You can learn more there. And Foodshed Guide is another website you may be interested in, also maintained by the Wallace Center and the National Good Food Network. It's really our site for producers wanting to adapt to the changing food business landscape, things that the discussion was centered on quite a bit today. The NGFN is on YouTube, on Twitter, and our website, ngfn.org. We are also on Facebook. Come like us. You can search for Wallace Center at Winrock International. Again, if you haven't already, sign up for our email updates. There's a link on the ngfn.org homepage, or just let us know again in that post-webinar survey. We will sign you up. Contact us at any time. There's our email address there, contact@ngfn.org. The NGFN would like to thank you again for your extended stay with us today. Let me encourage you once again to fill out that survey. That'll open your web browser. This concludes the webinar.